You hear it all the time, right? Every country isn't dead. But if everyone owes money, who exactly are they owing it to? The question gets even weirder when we talk about a central bank creating money out of thin air. Who's on the other side of that transaction? Well, today, we're going to open up the books and find the real answer.
Okay, so let's use the US Federal Reserve as our guide here. It's a topic that's surrounded by, let's be honest, a lot of noise and a lot of confusion. But the answer is actually hiding in plain sight, right there on a balance sheet. So in this explainer, we're going to calmly and clearly trace that IOU so you can see exactly how this whole thing works.
To figure out who the Fed owes, we've got to look at its balance sheet. Now, I know that sounds intimidating, but think of it less like some scary financial document and more like a story, a ledger that tells us exactly who gets what and who owes what.
And here's the one rule you have to remember. Money doesn't just poof into existence. It always lands on a ledger. For one person, it's an asset. For another, it's a liability. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to follow the money. We'll start with the cash in your wallet. Then we'll move to the electronic money that really powers the banking system, and we'll see exactly who holds the Fed's IOU.
First things first, we need to get one really crucial distinction right, because this is where most of the confusion starts. The Fed deals with two totally different kinds of money, and they are not created in the same way at all. Okay, let's just bust a huge myth right off the bat. The Fed doesn't actually print the cash you carry around. According to the St. Louis Fed, it's the U.S. Treasury's Bureau of Engraving and Printing that manufactures the paper bills. The Fed is more like a wholesaler. It places an order for the cash and then distributes it out to commercial banks. Now this is the money the Fed actually creates directly. Bank reserves. They're purely electronic, just numbers on a screen. They're the balances that commercial banks, like the one you use, hold in their own special accounts at the Federal Reserve. This computer money is the absolute heart of modern monetary policy. So, what it all boils down to is this. Physical cash is for you and me, for everyday public circulation. Bank reserves, on the other hand, are just for the banking system itself. They're used for banks to settle up with each other and with the Fed. One is physical, the other's digital. And understanding that difference is really the key to unlocking this whole puzzle. So, if the Fed isn't running a giant printing press in the basement, how on earth does it create those electronic reserves? Well, the answer is way less dramatic, but honestly, a lot more interesting. It all comes down to a simple swap of assets.
Here's how it works. When the Fed wants to put more money into the system, it doesn't just buy bonds straight from the Treasury. No. It goes into what's called the open market and buys assets like Treasury bonds from commercial banks. And how does it pay for them? It doesn't write a check. It just types a number. It credits the bank's electronic reserve account at the Fed. And that's it. New money, new reserves, created with a keystroke.
And this really gets to the heart of it. Former Fed Chair Ben Bernanke made this exact point. He said the Fed is, quote, not printing money to acquire the securities. It is an accounting entry, plain and simple. The Fed gets an asset, that's the Treasury bond, and in return it creates a matching liability. The new reserves it now owes to that commercial bank.
So let's finally answer our big question. Who does the Fed owe? Its own balance sheet gives us the answer. Its two main liabilities are, number one, Federal Reserve notes. Yep, that's the physical cash in all of our wallets, which is a liability to the public. And number two, deposits, which are mostly those electronic reserves that are owed to the commercial banks. Simple as that.
But hang on a second. Why is it just a ledger entry? Why isn't a dollar bill something you can trade in for, a chunk of gold? To get that, we need to take a quick trip back in time to see how this system came to be.
For a long time after the Fed was created in 1913, the dollar had a pretty complicated relationship with gold. But the system we live in today was really born in 1971. That's when President Nixon officially slammed the gold window shut, ending the dollar's direct convertibility to gold for foreign governments. And in that one moment, the dollar became what's called a pure fiat currency, backed not by a shiny metal, but by the full faith and credit of the US government.
Okay, so let's bring it all home. We've figured out the different types of money, we've seen how it's actually created. Now we can finally tackle some of the biggest myths out there and get to the real lessons of how this system works.
This slide really cuts through the noise. So myth number 1, the Fed just prints money for the government. The reality? Nope. The Fed buys government bonds on the secondary market from banks, not directly from the Treasury. Myth number 2, the dollar is backed by nothing. The reality? Well, it's backed by all the assets on the Fed's balance sheet, the full faith and credit of the US government, and maybe most importantly, the credibility of its institutions. So if you only remember 3 things, let it be these. First, know the liability. The Fed owes you and me for the physical cash, and it owes the banks for the electronic reserves. Second, the government's books are all connected. The Fed earns interest on the bonds it holds, and it sends most of those profits right back to the Treasury, which actually helps reduce the burden on taxpayers. And third, our system runs on institutions, not myths. Trust and policy credibility are the new gold.
So the next time you hear some wild story about how money is made, just remember, the real answer isn't some big conspiracy. It's just accounting. The mechanics are all right there, recorded on a public balance sheet. So, the most powerful thing you can do is ask the simplest question. Before you judge the story, take a look at the ledger.